All right, hello everyone. I probably should give some quick introduction while the questions are coming in, hopefully. Yeah, so my name is Evgeniy Meyke, and I represent Earthcape, company from Finland, doing collection management and biodiversity management software. First, big thanks to organizers for letting me introduce what we do. And to basically give you a quick introduction, I think the best thing would be is to essentially tell you a short story, how we came to the point where we are. Our roots are basically in ecology data management, and the whole story started with me doing some entomology 20 years ago and thinking about cataloging the collection and so on. Then spending about 12 years in ecology research group, doing my studies and work. And about 2011, we started a company to actually take the whole software part to a different level. And sorry, there's a question. Yeah, so Deb is asking if there's a video of, yeah, there's video of me. Would you like me to share the screen?
I need to let you do that. Give me 1 second.
All right. Yeah, well, there wouldn't be definitely enough time for actually properly presenting the software. What I would like to say is that it's, it's more or less typical collection management system with the most required modules and covering all aspects. But what probably would be the first question that people would ask is how different it is from existing ones. And I think the key point is that we're taking slightly or quite radically different approach to sort of how we work with projects and how we deploy the software. It sort of sits somewhere in between the boxed, sort of out of the box, ready to be used software package and a custom made software. What I've learned through my years at the ecology research is that it's very difficult to provide an out-of-the-box solution for almost anything in this field, be it museum collection management or ecology database tool that would satisfy most of the users. So we took a very flexible approach in terms of how customizable the software is, how easy it is to customize it, but then we sort of keep the core very focused on biodiversity data and fields that relate to that, including lab management or reference management and things like that. The fields that we're covering, they are mostly. Am I actually sharing the screen? Probably not. Right. Okay. Hold on.
I made you a co-host, so let me know if it will allow it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, now I'm sharing the screen. Right. So it's basically in terms of platforms. For now, it's a Windows client and a web client, and we're working on expanding that. And in terms of the sort of the domains that it's covering, it is centered about collections and observational data, but it's ready to be used in a sort of enterprise kind of large organization settings. That includes the project management, data set level management, security, lab management, and all kinds of utilities around it, like report designers, dashboards, configurable dashboards, and so on. If we sort of split this up into a bit more granular state. We've got, again, the security, a granular security down through the roles, users, permissions, including the audit, and so on. I'm not going to go into details as we wouldn't have time to go through all of that. So I'll just mention some highlights. So for instance, I mentioned the platform, I mentioned the security. Okay, so we've got into collections, which is probably the most interesting part for the audience here, but it's basically very boring in the sense that it's probably very familiar when you look at any of the collection management software. So as I said, the key difference in the sort of the utilities are around it and the platform itself. I will briefly mention the mapping part, which in the desktop client takes the shape of relatively sophisticated built-in GIS that allows doing things similar to how you would use a typical GIS system. And web mapping is currently very simple, based on Bing or Google Maps, but we are working on expanding on that. Reports, which is something that you would use for label designs or any other outputs oriented at the paper outputs from the database. Dashboard designers, which essentially allows you to configure any kind of panels to visualize your data, either for public outputs or for internal tracking or reporting. Yeah, just a couple of examples of dashboards. And then we come to the sort of the one of the key parts, which is what is called application models. That's where all the sort of magic happens in terms of customizing the application towards the user needs. So when I said it sort of sits in between, the main in between of the out-of-the-box application and a custom application, it means that we can customize the application to specific projects or to specific institutions very fast, but without changing the source code. Basically, all the customizations are stored as configurations inside the database, and you continue receiving the actual core updates of the core software without any interruptions, so you stay up to date, which means that we don't need to maintain the customized version, and you don't need to bear the costs of our maintaining of the customized version. And the customization can be applied, as you can see from the slide, to different levels. So basically, you can have customizations that are applied at the whole database level for the whole institution, for instance, or to the specific roles that users have, or even to specific users or projects or data sets inside the database. And another thing about this is that the customization tools are actually shipping with the application. So it means that we can either do the customizations for you or help with them, or you can actually do them yourself. It would take some training, but it's possible. Because all the customizations, that they are stored basically as records inside the database, both for the desktop client and for the web client that accesses the same database. And all of them are configurable through the essentially built-in kind of model editor that controls all the aspects of the application, like, for instance, the navigation menus, views, and so on. And the same logic of customizing all kinds of views is linked to the publishing part, like, for instance, outputs to GBIF, with which we integrate so that you can actually publish directly to GBIF, or outputting the data packages as a frictionless data, for instance, which is also configurable through the same views that are stored as configurations in the database. Let me check if there are any. I don't see any questions. Oh, yeah. And the chat. Yep. Okay. So at the moment, what we are doing is that most of the work has been around the consulting project, especially around ecology projects, and we're slowly moving into museums. So if your museum or collection actually is thinking about moving, let's say, away from Excel or Access, you could contact us and we could try to actually do that for you. Especially right now where we're looking for a few example projects, we could actually work with you as a free demonstration and see how things work. So there's a question from Deb about IPT. Yes, that's right. There is no IPT needed if you publish to Earthcape, to GBIF from Earthcape. I can quickly show the logic behind it. So if I just quickly look at the data sets inside one of the projects that we are working with. And so here we have some example of data sets that are published to GBIF. So I'll have a look at this one. Yeah. So what happens here is that we actually publish to GBIF by depositing the data set directly to Zenodo as a Darwin Core archive. So essentially with a click of a button, we create a Darwin Core archive, deposit it at Zenodo, and create a data set at GBIF pointing to Zenodo. So in this case, Zenodo kind of replacing the physical storage for the Darwin Core archive. Okay. How soon you can spin up an instance? Yeah, so that's a good question. So essentially, we can what we can do is we can move quickly from data conversion stage where we take the data to actual application that is ready for the customized application that is ready for users to start working with, and that can be, depending on the project, from hours to a couple of days. So that is something we can do very fast. Okay, there's another question. Yeah, there's a question about integration of programs like Genius. So, well, that would depend on specifics of this particular software in terms of APIs. So yes, we can integrate with external APIs, like for instance, we do with GBIF or iNaturalist or Bold. But yes, that would require an implementation. Okay, next question from Vladimir. Can you demonstrate taxonomy reconciliation and GBIF publishing? So taxonomy reconciliation at this point is pretty simple. It essentially works by calling the GBIF API and pulling the status and the valid name from GBIF, which essentially can tell you about the cleanness of your data, and then you can decide what you would like to do with this information. Do you want to stick to your own names or use the GBIF names? Yeah, we would probably need to be much more elaborate later for very detailed taxonomic work, but this has served quite a good purpose for most of the use cases. Okay. Can you tell GBIF they need to update their end? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point from Deb, that GBIF needs to keep their taxonomy up to date. That will always help. Ideally, we would not want to integrate with several taxonomic providers. We might add that too, but it would be best if we can stick to one provider that serves most of the taxonomic data. Okay. Okay, since no more questions at this point, let me go back to the presentation and see what I can still talk about. Right. Yeah, so in terms of customization and how adjustable the software is to the needs, one good example is the validation part, where apart from just built-in validation rules, the user is able to introduce their own validation rules of different types, depending on the data type, particular fields, and so on. And they're stored in a database and applied to the customization level that is chosen by the administrator. One thing that is typically, one question that's typically raised after getting familiar with the customization possibilities, that that it introduces certain problem points. Like, for instance, if the user interface is changed inside the institution very much, it affects the out-of-the-box documentation that comes with the product. So basically, you would have the screenshots that don't look anymore up to date, and so on. So what we are trying to also introduce is the way to regenerate the documentation. So essentially, the documentation topics and contents, they are sort of built into the database, into the software. And when you do changes or to the model of your application, you can then hit the button and regenerate the documentation so that it actually reflects your changes, and actually retaking the screenshots by actually launching the software and going through the views and taking the screenshots, and then producing the PDF that actually has an up-to-date documentation. Testability, that's another concern for most IT people, is that if the application is changed within the organization, how we can be sure that we don't invalidate the whole team, sort of getting it stuck. So actually shipping also the testing framework together with the application, so the functional scripts can be run, and scenarios can be tested before the application model is actually deployed for the whole organization. I'll check. Do we have? Right. Okay, so we have a question about which software does it work under? So it's a standalone software. Right now, it does require Windows for the client, and the web application would be requiring Windows Server as of today. But most likely later this year, we are switching to a different setup with a web application, and potentially next year we would have a cross-platform application. Okay, question about APIs. Yes, so currently the only way to interact with the backend of the application with the database is only directly with the database, if you have access, and the actual service that can be used as an API will probably be available later this year or next year. Okay. Forms, yep. So by forms, okay, but API, yeah, so it's not available at the moment, but when it is, yes, that will work this way, that you can actually insert edit records. Okay, Deb, how do forms work in Earthcape? It's so the application customization is essentially very visual. So for instance, if I take a form, let's say it's the dataset form. There's basically, apart from the application model editor, which can allow sort of very sophisticated application changes, there's also a way to essentially just visually rebuild the form. So for instance, moving fields around, reconfiguring them, and so on. So all these changes, they are stored as a configuration in the database. And then these forms can be applied, the layout changes for the forms or for the tables, they can be applied to different projects. For instance, they can be stored under different roles for the users. So for instance, you can have as a zoology curator having a form displayed in a different layout to the form that displayed for the botany curator, as an example. Okay, there's a question from David, internationalized. Yes, that's absolutely something that have been asked. So the same tool that is used for changing the application model is it has the okay, I don't have it open. Yeah, so this one. So when we open application model, it basically has the localization tool built in. So just here you can see that there's already picking in the language setting, and you can essentially apply different models depending on the localization. Most of the application is translated, all the standard parts, but then of course when you do the customizations, you may be changing the labels and so on. So you're actually free to do all the localization parts if you want to, different languages. It has also integration for automated translations. Like for instance, you can send your model changes to Google Translate or Bing, I think, and then get the results back and then edit them. It also supports the export and import of the translations from just CSV files or Excel. Okay. Yeah, testing. I quickly touched on testing.
I think we've got about 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, yep.
Yes.
Okay, so testing framework that comes with it is functional testing. So you basically have scripts, and then it runs the application and tries to execute all the steps. There was a question. Quality checks. No, that's a good point, and we've discussed it before. We need to look at it more closely and do those. Okay, I think the only thing I can add is in the last minute is that what we're trying to do is to be able to work with customers of any size, starting from individual people and private collections or students, all the way up to large organizations. And what we think is that our model of approaching the deployment and the customization will actually allow us to really scale the sort of the business model, so it works for all ends and all sort of parts of that scale. So yeah, so thanks everyone, and feel free to drop us a line if you have a question. And we are currently looking for example projects, example collections that we would use as test cases and use cases. And we would be happy to convert almost any size of the collection as an exercise for you and set up for you a demo.
Okay, thank you very much. So we had a question about how to contact you.
Yeah.
We could...
Let me paste. I've prepared some links to share. Hold on. Oops. Okay, so there's a link to the big presentation PDF. There's a website, and you can contact also me directly by this email or through the website.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being here with us today. In the name of everybody who's doing the organization. Thank you.